It is the season for graduations. Our family has two this month. Isaac graduated yesterday from college, and Dakota will graduate from high school later in May. I spent quite a bit of time at the Elizabethtown College baccalaureate and commencement events on Friday and Saturday. This was a particularly special class for me because in addition to my son, of course, Emma was also in the graduating class, president of the class, in fact, and I was very tempted to ask her to share her speech from yesterday's commencement service as this morning's sermon, but that seemed a bit unfair. It was fun to watch Isaac's roommates graduate, who we've gotten to know a bit over the last 4 years. We got to cheer for some graduates who are part of this congregation. And I always celebrate when I see students who have been in my classes walk across the stage in the Dell. The focus at Elizabethtown College is very student-centric, which is evident in much of the communication that comes from the college to families and staff, but is also evident in these special graduation events. At Friday evening's baccalaureate service, there was no sermon or message or speech, and very little faculty or staff involvement. Student speaker after student speaker shared their reflections on the time they have spent in this college era of their lives, clearly bookended on one side by their memories of their first steps onto campus, and on the other side by these final moments of recognition for their hard work during these years. Many of these student speakers particularly noted the remarkable and confounding reality that at the beginning of this journey, it felt like this time would last forever, 4 whole years. And in fact, they have so many memories that, as one student commented, it feels like he has lived 100 lifetimes since he came to college in the fall of 2021, in the shadow of COVID precautions and institutional reopenings, which does indeed also to me feel like many lifetimes ago. And at the same time, it feels like time has flashed by in a blur. Classes and assignments and activities and relationships that feel like so much, and yet suddenly this moment has arrived much faster than expected, and the conclusion of this chapter has been reached. Time is funny like that. The adage often is shared with young parents that the days are long, but the years are short. And in my experience, that has absolutely been true. 2 months ago, early in March, we began the season of Lent. We started on this journey together through the Gospel of Luke, beginning in chapter 9, when Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. We've explored the journey from Galilee to Jerusalem, going by way of Jericho on the road that came to life in the parable of the Good Samaritan. We have heard Luke's version of Jesus' teachings, including the stories of Mary and Martha, the fig tree and the lost sheep. We have heard about Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, his final meal with his disciples before his death, and then the mix of emotions present when the women and the other disciples discovered the empty tomb that evidenced Jesus' resurrection. Last week, we explored Jesus' appearance on the road to Emmaus, and then his disappearance immediately after they recognized him as they broke bread together. That's a lot. And in real time, the span of all of this could have been multiple days or maybe a couple of weeks. In real time for us since March, there has been a lot too. Personal struggles for many, the knowledge that there is more need than we can feasibly meet. The news cycle comes fast and furious. Sometimes one day's headlines feel like the weight of a year's worth of processing, and yet moments later, there is more. We've been asking what's next in this series, but I can recognize that sometimes we don't even want to know what's next because we are still getting our minds around what just happened. There are probably some graduates who are feeling that way. There are probably some folks that have felt that way after a diagnosis or the death of a loved one or a broken relationship or a seeming life failure. There are probably some people in this room or online who are feeling that way just from existing in the present moment. There were probably some disciples who were not yet ready to ask what's next, while still wondering what just happened after Jesus' crucifixion and the news that his body was not in the tomb. And out of this jarring tension, Jesus shows up. There are quite a few similarities to the previous verses that describe his appearance to the disciples on the road to Emmaus. In fact, they are still talking about that appearance, and now Jesus reappears again in the midst of the 11 and their companions. As in the previous story, Jesus is initially unrecognized. Here, though, specifically, the text says they thought they were seeing a ghost. And who could blame them, really? I would probably have thought the same. And so it is not shocking that they were startled and terrified and frightened. Yesterday morning, before the graduation ceremonies began, I had some conversation with another parent who works at the college and whose oldest child is this year a high school graduate who is planning to attend a college in the fall that is quite a long distance away. She is feeling a little anxious about sending her child off into the next phase of life. "You've been through this before," she said to me. "What's your advice?" And I thought for a moment and recalled what I noticed on Friday evening at the baccalaureate service. Over and over again, in addition to remarking about the complex nature of time, students commented that someone or someones have shown up for them. Some used that language exactly, showing up, but others referenced the idea that when they needed help or encouragement, that when they were feeling down or struggling or worried or just needed friendship, someone showed up. A parent, a professor, a sibling, a teammate, a coach, a mentor, a roommate, new friends. And so what I said to this parent who asked me this question about what advice I might have was that we do our best to prepare our kiddos, and then we send them into this beautiful world with the trust that someone will show up for them. Just like we show up for our students and for each other, someone will show up for our child, we hope. The disciples have been through a lot in a short amount of time. Their lives have been turned on end. Their teacher has been killed by religio-political powers that found his message to be problematic. The disciples hear that a couple of them have shockingly and illogically seen Jesus. These followers are feeling anxious and fearful and hopeful, confused and joyful and overwhelmed, and spending a lot of time with each other trying to piece lives back together. And then Jesus shows up again. And for the author of the Gospel of Luke, it is really, really important to include in the story that this is Jesus the man. This is Jesus described in a real body with flesh and bones. This is Jesus who asks, "Hey, do y'all have anything here to eat?" And then proceeds to eat a piece of broiled fish, let's be specific, in the presence of the disciples. According to Luke, this is Jesus who 24 chapters ago was in the womb of Mary, who stirred his second cousin, John the Baptist, to leap for joy in utero. And now a shift will occur as resurrected body Jesus guides his disciples to expanded understanding of what is going on, gives a final promise of sending the Holy Spirit to follow, and then is carried up into heaven. I ran across a quote this week in the best place to go for sermon research, Facebook. I spend less time there now than I used to, in part because I find that the things that show up on my social media feed are less and less things that connect me personally with others, and more ridiculous videos from sources that I cannot figure out. And also I find that there is such turmoil in the world, and many people go to the ironically faceless Facebook to vent their frustrations, sometimes jumping to conclusions, using language and postures that they would probably not use if they were, in fact, face to face. And that is not a space that I tend to find nurtures my soul or emotions. But I stay on Facebook because it connects me to people that I would not otherwise have connection with. And it is a place where occasionally beautiful stuff pops up in the midst of the junk. On some of the pages that I follow, including the page of author and preacher Barbara Brown Taylor. And so this past week, I saw this quote from Barbara Brown Taylor in her book, Leaving Church, on page 224. I have learned to prize holy ignorance more highly than religious certainty, and to seek companions who have arrived at the same place. I have mentioned before some of the gifts of being part of a pastoral team, and another one is the likelihood that if a book is not in my possession, it is quite possibly in the office of one of the other two. And so I borrowed this book that I had not yet read, although I've read some of Barbara Brown Taylor's other stuff and loved it. And Taylor, so I'm not done reading it yet, I'm about halfway through. But Taylor writes of her earliest experience feeling the call to ministry in the Episcopal tradition. She writes of her journey in her first couple of congregations as priest, very different contexts. She writes of the joys and challenges of sharing life with other humans, the questions of authority that many of us in pastoral leadership face, the tugs that we feel by more than one call on our limited capacity in the days and years with which we are gifted. And she writes of the reality that in the most critical moments of our lives, when faced with some of the most human decisions and experiences that we will face, the theological answer is often, I don't know, with a leaning into a faith and a trust that both feel more and less than human at the same time. There's a piece of me that feels like it is somehow my job to explain to you exactly how Jesus' body was physically resurrected and how a once dead human could be again in their midst eating a piece of fish. There's a piece of me that feels like maybe I'm supposed to explain exactly what it means when this gospel author writes, while he was blessing them, he withdrew from them and was carried up to heaven, which feels like a lot happening all at the same time. So if you are hoping for a solid explanation of what might have been going on here physically and or metaphysically and or spiritually, you probably already know that you've hired the wrong preacher. I'm going to claim holy ignorance. I do not know the right answer. I cannot imagine that this possibly could have happened in the way it is described in this particular gospel account, which I do believe was written by a faithful follower to tell a particular theological story to a particular group of people at a particular time and for a particular reason. And at the same time, when I consider my observations and experiences that lead me to a faithful belief in the hope that transformation is always possible, and that God has done and can do some pretty inexplicable things, I'm sorry to say, I just don't know. Perhaps another way of claiming holy ignorance is leaning into the mystery. If nothing else, I have found that just as I think I figure something out, my understanding changes. That has been the case since my children were small, and I was so relieved at 6 months old that they were finally on a good sleeping schedule, which turned out to abruptly change the next night. Just as I think I have figured out what my one true calling is in life, I realize that discernment is an ongoing and apparently unending process. Just as I think I have finally captured the essence of understanding the sacred presence that we humans have defined by 3 letters, G-O-D, I am confounded by a new experience or observation that expands my understanding further and proves, once again, that this sacred presence cannot be put in a theological box. Maybe that's part of what Luke is trying to say with this story of expansive understanding and the muddled mix of humanity and divine nature that is found in Jesus, appearing from nowhere and eating broiled fish, rooted in the familiar to them stories of Moses and the prophets, but also opening their minds to understand more deeply and expansively. Walking with his body out as far as Bethany, lifting hands, and then being taken into heaven. Jesus shows up in the people who respond to disasters, rebuild homes, provide care for children, and provide food. Jesus shows up in those who teach, in those who heal, in those who pay attention to the ones that others ignore, in those who love. Jesus shows up in the one who provides care like a mother, whether that relationship is biological or adoptive or relational or circumstantial, whether that mother be female or male or neither, whether that mothering begins in the ways that we hope and plan and expect or in ways that are unexpected and creative and sometimes difficult to understand. Jesus shows up in you for others and in others for you. Jesus shows up for the earliest followers and for us even now. Jesus shows up even in our disbelieving and our wondering, our uncertainty and our doubts. Jesus shows up even in our holy ignorance, perhaps because of our holy ignorance, not necessarily to prove who he is, not to say he as he shoves his skin-covered hands and feet in our faces, but to be present, to be accessible, to be along with, to be right there in body and to be right there in spirit. And to simultaneously ask the question and answer the question, what's next? May it be so.